Hi, you guys. Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you. And what I'm going to be talking about today is this full moon we have coming up here on Thursday, December 4th. The full moon peaks at 3:14 p.m. Pacific time, and this is taking place in the sign of Gemini, 13 degrees and 4 arc minutes Gemini. So you guys know the routine. This is the peak of a growth cycle that began approximately 6 months ago, and we had a new moon in the sign of Gemini. Over these 6 months, we've all been exposed to these astrological lunar forces that provide us with an opportunity for growth that are related to this sign of Gemini. And this full moon is very much a time to be honoring that growth, but this is also a time, maybe you've developed some of this Gemini energy that's not serving you. So as soon as that moon begins to wane, what I mean by that is the moon's getting fuller, 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 fuller. And then at 3:14 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday, December 4th, the moon's at her fullest form, then she starts to wane. Okay, if we want to stay in the natural flow of things, we can set the intentions to let go of any of this Gemini energy that just may not be serving you, or even us as a collective. But also, I've really noticed this a lot over the last couple of years. Full moons often can kind of illuminate or give people a full realization or in some way an epiphany that they realize something they just hadn't known before. This generally happens in like the days surrounding this full moon. Sometimes it can happen like the week before, the week after, that sort of thing. And a lot of times this will happen if you've got something in your natal chart that's somehow being triggered or activated by this full moon. So if you've got something, say, near 13 degrees Gemini, or maybe trining that near 13 degrees Libra or Aquarius or something like that. And a lot of times we can also see this, like the theme of our life that this would be related to by looking at what house in our natal chart this sign of Gemini would be coming through. What house in your natal chart is this full moon activating? And a lot of times it will show you the theme of your life, that like this whole, like, gosh, I didn't even realize this before. Why didn't I realize this before? That sort of thing. So all of these things that can occur with a full moon. So what I'm going to do, is I'm going to break down the sign of Gemini for you, because again, this is a time to be thinking about how have I grown in these ways, but also is there anything I want to let go of that's related to this? I'll break down the sign of Gemini, and then I'm going to pull up the chart. We're going to go through these really, really interesting aspects that are going on with this full moon. One, we've got a grand water trine going between Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter. So that's kind of exciting. But we've also got what's called a grand square. And this is something that just doesn't happen very often. We've got the full moon in Gemini. We've got the sun in Sagittarius. And these guys are making basically an exact square to the lunar nodes, the north and south lunar node. And so with that said, this full moon has a very big influence on our karma, especially as a collective. Okay, so really, really interesting stuff to talk about here. And then I'm also going to be talking about certain parts of the body that are ruled by the sign of Gemini. I'm also going to talk about some parts of the body that are ruled by Sagittarius, because we also have a lot of Sagittarius energy coming through. These parts of our bodies become activated in the days surrounding this transit. So I will be mentioning some potential herbal remedies to help support these parts of our bodies in the days surrounding this transit. And I will also be mentioning some gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Gemini. I always leave a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through in the description below. And as I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, pulling out my journal every time we have a full moon, writing down the growth I'm grateful for, writing down what I want to let go of, applying it to the house in my natal chart that it's manifesting through. And then I like to take some gemstones that resonate well with the astrological forces we are receiving and put them on top of my journal. It's like the words that I just spelled out are then making a stronger energetic and metaphysical connection with those celestial forces. Now, if you don't have any of these gemstones, please do not feel disappointed or you're missing out on anything. I always take advantage of a new moon to write down when I am trying to manifest a certain gemstone into my life. I'll write that down in my journal on a new moon. Okay, so there's that. Let's get into this sign of Gemini. Gemini is what we call the mutable air sign. When we talk about mutable in astrology, we're talking about the signs that just seem to be a little more adaptable. Has a lot to do with energetically speaking here. The mutable signs, like when the sun is going through the sign of Gemini, or when the sun is going through any mutable sign, It means we're at the very end of a season, okay? And it's mutating the energy to go into the new season. When the sun is in the sign of Gemini, it's the very, very end of spring. So it's mutating the energy for summer. Maybe not so much in Australia and New Zealand, but for at least for most of us in the world. Now, also in that element of air, in my opinion, it's the most mutable, it's the most adaptable, it's the most flexible sign of the zodiac. Because when we think about this element of air, most air doesn't want to stay stagnant. Air often, it's kind of when I think about energetically the sign of Gemini, it kind of makes me giggle because I think about going outside on a super windy day, but the wind keeps changing directions. So me with like very long hair, it's like it's blowing that way and it's blowing that way. That's very Gemini energy. And really, it's like also in that element of air has a lot to do with social skills, okay? And also has a lot to do with intellect. Let's talk about social skills first. This is very much the sign of communication. I think back to like my high school days and thinking about all the Gemini kids were like tend to be popular in the sense that they will hang out with the jocks, hang out with the music people, hang out with the smart people, hang out with all different types of people. Like, what's the information going on over here? Ooh, what's the information going on over here? I think of it as this sign of being the social butterfly. Certainly doesn't mean everybody who's a Gemini out there is going to be super sociable. But you will notice a lot of them are. They like to hear about what's going on over here. They like to share with other people what's going on in their life. They tend to be very sociable people. And again, it's like because it's in a mutable modality, it's like going from place to place to place. Okay, now also, again, the air signs have a lot to do with intellect. The motto for the sign of Gemini is I think. It's like the forever student, okay? The forever student that zones in on the facts, okay? We think about like here's Gemini in the zodiac. Sagittarius is opposite that. Sagittarius is looking at the grand big picture of things, like a faith-based energy, versus Gemini is like, no, I want the facts. Gemini people, like Gemini rising, Gemini sun, Mercury in Gemini, whatever it is, tend to be very intrigued by things that are of an intellectual nature. Okay, now also it's ruled by Mercury. Mercury, the messenger of the gods. Okay, Mercury, in my opinion, Mercury is one of the most fascinating things to study in astrology, especially when we understand the connection to Mercury and certain archetypes, okay? In Greek mythology, Mercury is Hermes, messenger of the gods. In Norse mythology, Mercury is Odin. In Egyptian mythology, Mercury is Thoth. These are all archetypes like messengers of the gods. Basically, it's like Mercury, in fact, Rudolf Steiner talked a lot about this, where like the mercurial forces or in some way shape or form a Mercury archetype or sort of what would appear as human would show up on earth and would share information with the priests. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that Mercury could go up and get messages from the gods up in the heavens and go down into the underworld and get messages from rulers of the underworld and then come back up and relay that information again to the earthly creatures, the earthly, humans and the creatures on earth. So Mercury A is a very busy character. Mercury in our body is, you're listening to me talk right now. Mercury is taking that information in through something called your afferent nerves and delivering that information into your spinal cord or your consciousness. And then let's say you want to go share this information with somebody else. Mercury is the one that would find that file of information and bring it back out for you to communicate. Okay, that's the messenger of the gods. The sign of Gemini is very much the messenger of the zodiac, the sign of communication. Now, it's also the sign of duality. It's represented by the twins, okay? There can be a little bit of a shiftiness that comes through with the sign of Gemini, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's more like, I got to go here and I got to go here at the same time. You'll notice a lot of Gemini people, it's like kind of a little bit spunky, a little bit, I got to go like, or even feeling two ways about something at the exact same time. Or even like the data processing, taking information in at the same time information is being put back out through communication. Again, it's the sign of duality, the glyph. When I pull up the chart, you'll see the glyph for the sign of Gemini. It's basically the Roman numeral of 2. Okay, now with that said, this is also a sign that can be very much associated with our siblings. Okay, maybe you've grown in a way that you've made a stronger connection to your siblings, or maybe there's something you need to let go of that's going on between your siblings, that sort of thing. And so I hope this helps you understand this sign of Gemini. Like, how have you grown in these ways? When we talk about, it's not necessarily just verbal communication. This sign of Gemini can also have a lot to do with written communication. Maybe you've been working on a book, or maybe you've been a little more active on social media platforms, or maybe, in fact, out of all the signs, the sign of Gemini would be the sign that's most connected to social media. Aquarius is too, but Aquarius is more like the technological advancements of things like social media. Gemini is more the communication theme that goes on. In fact, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's an AI. I don't even know what to call it. Some sort of an AI that's actually called Gemini. Okay, it's the thinker and the communicator. So, how have you grown in these ways? And is there anything you want to let go of that's related to this sign of Gemini? I will say this as well. The sign of Gemini can come with nervousness because I'll just say this right now. The sign of Gemini actually has a very big influence on really the sign of Gemini and the sign of Sagittarius opposite each other have a very big influence on what's called the afferent and the efferent nerves, like basically messages being zooming through the nervous system. And it can come with a little bit of a nervous kind of energy. If that's something that's been going on for you, you might want to set the intentions to let some of the nervousness go. There's so many different ways we can work with this energy. And not only that, but be thinking about, what house in your natal chart this is specifically manifesting for you. Okay, so there's that. I hope that helps you guys understand the sign of Gemini. And if you are new here, what I work with is called geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we're looking at here is a snapshot of the tropical zodiac at the time of this full moon. If you're super new here, these right here are the symbols for the planets and the celestial bodies. Okay, and when we go in the wheel just a little ways, these are the symbols for the zodiac signs that all these planets and celestial bodies would be beaming through onto Earth at the time of this full moon. So let's start here. This right here is a symbol for the moon, and this right here is the glyph for the sign of Gemini. See, the sign of duality, that the two pillars. Okay, now at 13 degrees Gemini, this is in the second decan of that sign of Gemini. So there's a little bit of a Libra twist coming through here, which can also do really well with social skills and that sort of thing. But ultimately, it's kind of a whimsical energy we're receiving, but it also just knowing astrology, this chart kind of makes me giggle a little bit because over here is the sun in the sign of Sagittarius, and happy solar return to all of you Sages out there. Happen to love the sign of Sagittarius. I'm actually a Sagittarius rising. I also love the sign of Gemini. This like the excitable signs of the zodiac. They're both very mutable. And that's what I'm saying. Like looking at this chart kind of makes me giggle a little bit because we're receiving the sun is beaming through the sign of Sagittarius, and it's the sign of Sagittarius is it's the sign of optimistic. It's faith-based. It wants to go on adventure. It's like the sign of wildfire, and it really lights things up, okay? And with the full moon in the sign of Gemini, like I was driving home the other day, and I was just kind of thinking about this full moon coming up, and I was like, what an interesting human this would be. If somebody was born with this, they'd be like kind of bouncing all over the place. I got to go talk to this person. I'm kind of faith-based. I want to go travel. I want to see the world, and I got to talk to these people. And it's kind of an exciting sort of energy coming through here. But also, what we've got come through here in this sign of Sagittarius is also Venus. So Venus coming through 5 degrees Sagittarius. This is, you might want to look to see if you've got anything in the sign of Sagittarius, period. If you've got anything near 5 degrees Sagittarius, you got Venus beaming right on that thing. Venus is the influencer of love, right? Venus is the influencer of love and beauty and what we're attracted to. And so she's highly activated in this sign of Sagittarius because it's sign of, when we talk about mutable signs, the ones that are adaptable, kind of shifting the way through life. And this is the sign of Sagittarius is a fire sign. So that's why we call it wildfire, because it's kind of activated and revved up and ready to go. So Venus she's active right now. The planet of love is kind of hyper right now in a fiery sort of way, especially because she's with the sun in the sign of Sagittarius, fairly conjunct. That's about an 8-degree orb. but still, that's kind of exciting. And then we've also got Mars here coming through the sign of Sagittarius. So Mars is like what stimulates us. Mars is what rules over our muscles and our adrenals. Mars is what makes us take action. Okay, if you look at the symbol for Mars, that is because Mars wants to pierce and penetrate through things. Mars is a hot and dry energy. So he's super revved up in this sign of Sagittarius. In fact, it's kind of hilarious that the sun is right in the midpoint of Venus and Mars. So this is what Mars is kind of like our animal passion. Okay, Mars has a lot to do with our sex drive, and Venus is more like snuggles and love. And the sun is kind of right between them. Venus and Mars both have a lot to do with relationships, okay? In their own little ways. They've got a big influence on our romantic relationships in life. And we've got the sun right between them. So this is what I'm talking about. If you got anything near 22 degrees Sagittarius and you got Mars revving that thing up, if you got anything near 13 degrees Sagittarius, then the sun is beaming his bright, warm light onto it. And if you got anything near 5 degrees Sagittarius, you've got Venus kind of softening things and trying to bring a little bit of romance, or maybe not even necessarily romance. It could be something of a creative nature, something that's lovely into your life. But overall, this sign of Sagittarius is heavily activated for this full moon. Now, let's talk about this grand square. Okay, so here's the moon. This is what happens every time we have a full moon. The sun and the moon are exactly opposite each other. The sun's at 13 degrees 4 minutes Sagittarius. The moon is at 13 degrees 4 minutes Gemini. Here's this line that goes straight across. They're making that opposition. But then what we see is this square, this 90-degree angle coming down to the south node at 13 degrees 43 minutes Virgo. But still, 13 degrees is where the sun is, 13 degrees is where the south node is, and then we've got over here another square going from the sun over to the north node, which is at 13 degrees Pisces, and then this square that comes back down to the moon. So that's why it's called a grand square. We got a box in the middle of the chart. Now, if this was a human, there might be some sort of tension. I would definitely say that this person would deal with sort of like tension through the nervous system, because Pisces and Virgo also have an influence on certain parts of the nervous system, and Gemini and Sagittarius both have an influence on the nervous system. But this also, when we think about what these nodes do, okay, the north node pumps energy in, the south node drains energy out. Now, this has a massive influence on our just overall karma in the world. Okay, so it's like this north node is, yes, it's pumping energy in, but it's like kind of trying to take us in that Piscean direction. At the same time, it's kind of draining out karma related to the sign of Virgo that just doesn't serve us. Look to see if you got anything near 13 degrees, 13 degrees Pisces or Virgo in your natal chart. Because if you do, this is actually, I'm just going to say this. If you got any prominent celestial body, your sun, your moon, or even your rising sign, or if it's your Mercury, or maybe it's your Mars. I mean, it depends on how it's hitting your chart. But if you have anything very prominent at that 13-degree mark, whatever it is, in some way, shape, or form, it's receiving a very strong dose of energy. Because in some way, shape, or form, it's this full moon is going to be making an aspect with them, either through the sun or the moon or the north or the south node. And so it very much, when I'm talking about the collective, I mean, I'm just going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. That when I think about, ways that I have grown related to the sign of Gemini, it's very, very easy for me to do that. And it's also very easy for me to let go of certain things that are like setting the intentions to let go of things on a personal level. But when I think about these nodes are involved, I want to think about the collective. And I think about this as the sign of duality. Okay. I think about this as the sign that is very strongly related to social media. And I think about how it's like the world is just being taken over by social media. And, certainly not everybody's on X and Instagram and Facebook and that sort of thing, but a vast majority of the human population is. I mean, obviously in some parts more so in the world than others, and I think about this is where we're getting our information from. This is where everybody is receiving most people are receiving their information from. Okay, now with that said, there's information coming from this direction saying this, there's information coming from this direction saying that, there's information coming from this direction saying that. Different, everybody's being fed with different sources of information. And with that said, what we're seeing is the divisiveness. I mean, I feel like humanity is more divided in their political perspectives, their religious views, just their beliefs, period. And so it's creating these like super tension arguments between people. And I've seen it time and time again in person, but even more so related to, through comments on social media or just things that people are sharing or whatever it is. And when I think about what I want to let go of, yes, I'm grateful that we have these platforms to be able to share information. And I think that free speech is imperative. Personally, I think that that's probably one of the most important things that we can have. But I also really want to set the intentions for humanity to let go of some of this divisiveness. Humanity really needs to come together. And this full moon, making this grand square between the full moon, like the sun and the moon, to the north and south lunar node, I think is a really good time to be working, setting the intentions not just for ourselves, but also for the collective. When we think about Pisces energy, Pisces is the sign of oneness. Pisces is the sign of spiritualism. Pisces motto is I believe. Okay, so we're all being pumped full with this Pisces energy. That's all the way till I think it's July 28th of 2026. And the south node, the drain point going through the sign of Virgo, Virgo pays very, very close attention to detail. Okay, Virgo is also actually ruled by Mercury. It's very detail oriented, and also the sign of like analyzing. The motto for the sign of Virgo is I analyze. So might be letting go, setting intentions to let go of some of that, making it, this sign of Virgo can make it very difficult to take a step back and look at the grand big picture of things. Think you could get so absorbed into one little piece of information and forget to like listen to other people's perspectives. That I'm seeing really strong forces that provide us all with an opportunity to take into consideration. We really obviously have grown in a lot of ways with ways of communicating together. I mean, even just email, but also the social media platforms and so on and so forth. Being grateful for those things, but also letting go of things that could be more like an irritant, if that makes sense. Okay, so there's that. Now, let's go over to Mercury, the ruler of this full moon. So here's Mercury. There's that messenger of the gods. There's that guy that gets to go up and talk to the heavens and then go and talk to the underworld and talk to humans on Earth, that sort of thing. Busy little Mercury here. It's coming through 22 degrees Scorpio. So Scorpio is the sign of intensity. Okay, Scorpio, if you got anything near 22 degrees Scorpio, you got Mercury, mental function, communication, data processing coming through there very intensely. Okay, that sign of Scorpio is fierce and magnetic. But what's really interesting, let's start with this, like basically because Mercury rules Gemini, he's the ruler of this full moon. So he's activated. He's buzzed right now, okay? And I don't mean buzzed like alcohol buzz. I mean more like he's just buzzy because he's stimulated for this full moon. He's sending a trine over here to Saturn, okay? Which that's actually an approaching trine. So it's actually getting stronger. Saturn, is going through the sign of Pisces all the way till February, very late evening, February 13th of 2026. And then Saturn finally is done in the sign of Pisces. But while he's finishing up in the sign of Pisces, I keep putting a lot of emphasis on this. Like it's such a good idea to be disciplined with our spiritual practices, because that's ultimately what Saturn wants. He wants discipline. He wants us to take care of our responsibilities. And that sign of Pisces, again, it's the mystic of the zodiac. But that said, this harmonizing ray that's going between Mercury and Saturn is really interesting. In fact, it could kind of even, it definitely heightens the intuition, especially when we talk about the trine that's connecting down here to Jupiter and Cancer. I'll get there in a minute. But this is good for concentration. So if we think about Mercury coming through this fierce sign of Scorpio, but harmonizing with the discipliner, Saturn, in this sign of oneness and spirituality, that actually creates a really strong force for concentration. Okay, then we've got this trine going down here to Jupiter in Cancer, where Jupiter's in retrograde, and Jupiter will be in retrograde all the way until March, I believe, like the first week of March of 2026. But still, he's exalted in the sign of Cancer. Jupiter expands things. Basically, Jupiter makes anything he touches a bigger deal. But he is the great benefic. Jupiter's wonderful. He brings abundance. He brings luck. He brings wisdom. Look to see in your chart if you've got anything near 24 degrees Cancer. If you do, Jupiter, whatever that thing is, Jupiter's trying to make it a bigger deal. Okay. But this is like basically the sign of Cancer. I mean, the motto is I feel, it senses things. All of these water signs are recognized for their intuition and even psychic powers. And since they're all harmonizing together with very prominent celestial forces, I mean, Mercury, Saturn, and Jupiter are a big deal, and they're all connecting. And not only that, but it's approaching, it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. In fact, the days after this full moon, Mercury will make that exact trine with them. So this really enhances, again, like the oneness, some sort of a spiritual connection with intensity, but also this ability to be able to concentrate. In fact, if you are somebody who's, say, writing a book or something that requires, maybe you're building a website, maybe you're building a business, maybe there's something that you're working on that requires all of these factors, all of this, the some sort of like spiritually tapped in, but also, abundance and philosophy, but also requires discipline with these things and the mental function coming from Mercury. Anyway, I hope that made sense. That's a really, really beautiful lineup, especially because we have the grand trine and we've got the grand square. I feel like I would love this. If there was somebody born with this natal chart, I feel like I would love this person. Okay, now where should we go next? We might as well back up here and talk about Neptune. Neptune's kind of part of this grand trine, but not quite so much. In fact, I'm not even going to bring that into the picture. Neptune is also in retrograde all the way until December 10th, I believe it is. Now, Neptune, so he's just about done in the sign of Pisces. Neptune leaves Pisces late January of 2026. Neptune is one of Pisces' rulers, okay? Neptune is what makes Pisces the spiritual one. Neptune is what influences things that are of this very dreamy spiritual nature, creates visions. And so working with extreme force in that sign of Pisces at that 29th degree, the anaretic degree, the very last degree of Pisces. And not only that, I will say this, when we think about Neptune in retrograde, it's like Neptune already creates these dreams and these visions and, things that are of a mystical nature, that sort, especially in the sign of Pisces. And while he's in retrograde, you could almost be thinking about imagine that, somebody who's just kind of constantly in dreamland, kind of really always thinking about things that are of a spiritual nature. I mean, I feel like most people know at least one person like that, that's just kind of always kind of going off into daydreamland. Well, imagine that person driving their car backwards. It's like there's a little bit of a sketchiness to it. It's what we would call a critical degree at 29 degrees. If you got anything near 29 degrees Pisces, I would be very mindful of this. I would be trying to heighten the intuition without allowing to leave like the importance of this material physical experience. But also what I'm loving about this, I know I keep saying this, but we certainly do not get this opportunity very often. The fact that we've got Saturn and Neptune still pretty tightly conjunct, they're going to be pretty darn close together all the way kind of even going through March of next year. Saturn Let's start with Neptune. Neptune is the one that says, okay, I can dream up. This is what I want to do with my life. I've got these dreams and these visions that I can create this. But Neptune can't necessarily bring those things into fruition. Neptune's more the one that helps us dream things up, but can't bring them into physical form, versus Saturn can. Saturn is more like he's Mr. Earth, and he Saturn can be kind of harsh, but that's because he's rigid. He wants us to take care of our responsibilities. He wants us to be disciplined. And he's the one that would actually like say you're trying to create a business or something like that. It's like Neptune here, or a piece of art, or you're building a home, or whatever it is that you've been dreaming up that you're trying to create. Okay, then we've got Saturn here that says, okay, well, let's actually do it. Let's lay down the discipline and let's do it, especially if it involves something that's even slightly or remotely related to something that's spiritual. Okay. And especially since that North Node is also going through the sign of Pisces. So that's really a pretty lovely lineup there. Now, let's go to, might as well talk about Uranus next. So Uranus also in retrograde. Uranus is in retrograde until February, I believe, early February of 2026. Now, Uranus finishing up in the sign of Taurus. Uranus is what's bringing the unexpected. Okay, Uranus is what brings these very weird, very unpredictable kinds of forces. Uranus is this spazzy kind of energy, very electrical in nature. Okay, and he's in retrograde. If you got anything near 28 degrees Taurus, recognize that if there's something going on in your life, and of course it depends on what it is, it's going to be very different if you got Mercury near 28 degrees Taurus versus Saturn 28 degrees Taurus. But if you've got something prominent near 28 degrees Taurus, he's trying to bring, I mean, Uranus can sometimes bring like miraculous healing or miraculous like changes into people's life, but it's very often like unpleasant surprises that Uranus will bring. But on the same token, he's trying to free you from something. That's his ultimate goal, is freedom. Uranus is a freedom fighter, but he's very aggressive while in retrograde. Uranus actually does very strange things, like what we can see optically with Uranus, not with our bare eyes, but through a telescope. Uranus does very weird things when he's in retrograde, like flipping upside down and all kinds of weird, like strange, like vibrant lights sort of thing that we can see come from Uranus. Very, very strong while in retrograde. And not only that, but Uranus is making this sextile to Neptune for kind of like a whole nother year. They're going to be in different signs next year, but still, it's like the dreamer, Mr. Visions here, Neptune, making an opportunistic connection with the wild card here, Uranus, going through that sign of Taurus. I do think we're going to see Uranus is in Taurus until April, and I think it's April 28th, maybe it's April 20th of 2026. I know it's in April of 2026 that Uranus will finally be done in the sign of Taurus. And I feel that sign of Taurus is very much the sign of money and material possessions. Okay. And for the collective, I think we're going to see even more weird and rapid changes going on with things that involve finances. I think we're going to see things that really kind of get triggered, or something goes on either involving cryptocurrencies or any kind of digital currencies, or something with the stock market, something like that. I think we might see something that is probably going to feel a little confusing. In fact, I just saw something today that apparently Donald Trump says now he wants to send out $2,000 to everybody next year, which, okay. And it's interesting because this Uranus it's hitting something in his natal chart. So that's also very interesting. Okay, so there's that. Now let's go to Pluto and then Chiron. So Pluto here still at 1 degrees Aquarius, almost at 2 degrees Aquarius. So you got anything near 2 degrees Aquarius in your natal chart? Guess what? You are about to experience a very big transformational process. Okay, that's what Pluto influences. It can feel very, very turbulent. but he's the planet of power. He's trying to empower us. I mean, especially, I would look to see if you got anything near 2 degrees, Aquarius, Libra, or Gemini. If something prominent, if it's your sun or your Mercury or your rising sign or something like that, your moon, Pluto, depending on what that celestial body is, it's like he's hitting it. He's sending a ray towards it that's trying to transform. It could be your thought process. It could be, depending on how it's hitting your chart, it could be your home. It could involve your relationship. It could involve your finances. It could involve, depending on how it's hitting your chart. There's so many things that Pluto will try to like almost tear down. And it could even be like something psychological inside yourself rather than in your outer environment. But Pluto tries to like tear something down to basically, in short, rebuild something that's more powerful than what was there before. So take that into consideration. Not only that, but we've also, this trine will be going between Uranus and Pluto also for kind of like a year. It's such an interesting lineup. Okay, now Chiron also in retrograde all the way till December 31st. I think it's December 31st. Chiron is in retrograde through that sign of Aries. Okay, now I will say this. There's a very strong, Chiron's the wounded healer, has a lot to do with our wounds that are said to be coming from previous lifetimes, may have manifested in early childhood and kind of always stuck with us in some way, shape, or form, even though they're usually in our subconscious. But when we work to heal those wounds, we can become healers ourselves. And Chiron, going through the sign of Aries, he's fired up. Aries is the sign of self. It's the warrior. It's the pioneer. And sending this very, very strong trine, I mean, off by minutes up to Mars in Sagittarius. Look to see if you got anything near 22 degrees Sagittarius or Aries or even Leo in your natal chart. Because if so, there's also probably something that's like trying to rev up a healing journey. Not necessarily like a physical healing journey. I suppose it could have to do with that, but it's more an emotional healing or psychological healing or philosophical healing or something of that nature, because this is a very, very strong trine going between, because Mars here rules the sign of Aries. So that trine, they're both at 22 degrees. So it's basically an exact trine, but it's especially strong since we're talking about Mars. Okay. Mars being Aries ruler, making that trine even stronger. Okay. So I'm going to leave that there. Now let's get to body parts. Sign of Gemini rules the hands, rules the lungs, rules the arms, doesn't rule, that rules a little bit of the shoulders, not the elbows though. Strangely, the elbows are ruled by the sign of Cancer. So might want to be a little bit mindful of these things. But also, again, the lungs, might want to pay a little extra attention to the lungs. If you got lung problems, you might want to, I'm not a doctor. This is not any kind of medical advice whatsoever. I always have to say that. Always check in with your healthcare practitioner and do your own research before putting things in your body. But Mullein, a big, beautiful plant. The leaves get huge. Mullein, I mean, you could, a lot of times you can find it growing in nature, but a lot of times you can, buy it online or whatever. I always recommend, again, this is not recommendations because I'm not a doctor. I can't make recommendations. But I will say that Mullein is really, really great for the lungs. You can, I always say, organic. I would not do an herb that is not organic. Herbs, especially because they're so sensitive to the pesticides and the fungicides and herbicides and that sort of thing. But Mullein, I can't imagine somebody spraying pesticides on Mullein. It just grows so well, and it's a huge plant, but it's great for the lungs. You can smoke it. You can make it into a tincture. That's why I've got a Mullein tincture. Mullein outside is just already growing. It's already, I'm so excited for the Mullein next year. Because what I love to do, if there's fresh Mullein growing, I love to just go out, pick the leaves off the plant and make a batch of tea just with the fresh leaves off the Mullein plant. Excellent for lungs. Also, Elecampane can be really good for lungs. Again, do your own research and check in with your healthcare practitioner. But also, the sign of Gemini rules over the afferent nerves. So again, the afferent nerves are basically taking information into us. And then Sagittarius, opposite Gemini, rules the efferent nerves, which are the nerves that take the information back out, like sending information through the system to the spinal cord and then information back out to the muscles, and also for us to be able to communicate. So Sagittarius, where Venus and the Sun and Mars all are, is activated. It's like basically the opposition here that's going on between these two zodiac signs. The nervous systems can be very, very active. For some people, could be very much overactive or overstimulated. Depends on how it's hitting your chart. Some people might not notice anything at all. If you got a ton of Pisces energy, then you might just be receiving a bunch of relaxed energy right now with Neptune and Saturn and the North Node going through the sign of Pisces. But if you've got anything prominent in these Gemini, Sagittarius, the polarity going on between them, might want to pay a little extra attention to your nervous system. And what I really like for the nervous system is specific to the sign of Gemini. I really like milky oats or oat tops, but you got to be really mindful with those because they have to be really properly harvested. They have to, and it's like the medicinal properties will dissipate over a certain length of time with the milky oats, or because it's basically like the milk that's in the milky oat tops, the milky stuff. That is what's really, really good for the nervous system. So obviously that does dry up after a certain amount of time. But also hops can be really, really great. Hops is very, very powerful. I've heard some people say that hops can make people sleepy, like in a tincture form. I've taken hops plenty of times. I've never experienced it making me sleepy, but for some people, I suppose it could. And then also, when we think about that sign of Sagittarius being involved here, in fact, the sign of Sagittarius also rules like the sciatic nerve, kind of like the hips and thigh area. Blue vervain can be really nice for kind of calming those areas of the body. And there's also something called, oh boy, I can't remember the name. Goldenrod, royal fern. I think it was royal fern. I'm not sure about that one. I'm going to rewind here. Basically, what we want to do is we want to take care of our nervous system. Blue vervain can be great. But regardless, we want to be mindful with our nervous system in the days surrounding this transit. Meditation is always really good. Might want to be mindful about how much sleep you're getting, especially on the night of the full moon. Actually, I'm going to say the night before the full moon. I'm going to say that, the night of December 3rd, when the moon is going into her fullest form, I think it's probably really, really important that we all get a good night's sleep because these things are activating our nervous system. Okay, now, gemstones. The dedicated zodiacal birthstone for the sign of Gemini is agate. This right here is my favorite piece of agate. This is blue lace agate. And the reason why I like this is because it's a calming stone. When we think about the sign of Gemini being very active energy, the blue lace agate is it's almost like a Saturnian influence, which Saturn kind of tightens things, kind of cools them down, slows them down. Okay, so that's why I like the blue lace agate, but I also love these guys. These are I got two. I got another one right there that I keep right in front of my computer because agate can actually be very, very protective from unwanted energies. I'm thinking about things that are coming through my computer. Any kind of agate, the one I just showed you, the bigger one, that will be a little more stimulating than the blue lace agate, but any kind of agate. And people don't realize agate's actually a very, very powerful stone. It's super affordable. One of my favorite stones to work with. Could be great for the nervous system. Okay, now also, I'm going to mention these guys right here. Serpentine. I had a really wild experience with serpentine, meditating, just holding these guys. And from my understanding, especially the green stones can also be really good for the nervous system, but in the sense that helps us concentrate. In fact, the sign of Gemini, again, being ruled by Mercury, Mercury's very specific stone is a green emerald. And so with that said, it's like that when we think about what Mercury does, again, the data processing information going in and out, that green energy, the green ray, is said to be very beneficial to that, helping us concentrate, not necessarily overstimulating the concentration or just overall nervous system or thinking, that sort of thing. Again, the motto for the sign of Gemini is I think. And that is very much what I experienced meditating with two pieces of serpentine, the green stones. It's also said to be really good for spiritual exploration. So I think I will leave that there. Again, you can always find a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through in the description below. And if you'd like to schedule a reading with me, you can schedule through my website, which is erinwageastrology.com. I also leave a link for that in the description below. I do hope to hear from some of you or all of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.